You have to laugh at yourself. Okay, so this is some Calgary data from the Learning Our Future Together study. You know, 71% agree or strongly agree that Calgary is a good place to work. 65% say it values teacher professionalism. I'd give a lot for some statistics like this coming out of Chicago or Miami. Okay? Like 70-75% indicate satisfaction with learning conditions. And 98% report positive relationships with students. Fabulous. Finland, by the way, is one of the jurisdictions where the students least like school. Okay? So when you're kind of hearing about Finland, because people put a spin on Finland sometimes, you guys are doing something right. Okay? You're reporting positive relationships with students and similar percentage with positive relationships with parents. But where's the dissatisfaction? Okay, about a third say, ooh, class sizes are too big. It's too hard to get to know the kids. Okay? 46% are saying, we got students with disabilities out there that aren't getting the support they need. 62% work more than 50 hours a week. Yeah, I don't know what's going on with our educational reform movement, but the solution is always just to work people more. Okay, so I was sitting over there with my students. I was in London last fall, and I had this guy named Alan Boyle. He does a lot of work with Andy Hargraves. Alan Boyle used to skip school, and he'd go and listen to this band called the Beatles playing in Liverpool. And he was good friends with Pete Best, you know, the drummer who got kicked out when they brought on Ringo Starr. So, you know, I kind of had him talk about that first, so I'd make sure the students back home were really paying attention. Do I have your attention? Okay, and Alan's over there in England, and he hears, you know, one of my bright young teachers who's working in a charter school, and they're saying, you know, we all know that we work too hard, but we're all going to try and hold ourselves to a limit of 60 hours a week. And Alan over there in the UK, where they have a much better tradition of working class militancy, he says 60 hours a week, that sounds like slavery to me. You know, sometimes you got to get people outside of your context to kind of say, what's a good work-life balance? You know, in the US, our model is to throw these young people into schools, totally burn them out, and then bring in, you know, a few other people 3 to 5 years later. It's not a sustainable model. You want to learn about unsustainable educational change? Come visit us in Boston. I'll show you around. Okay, we have perfected unsustainable change. Okay, so, and then people want more PD embedded in the school day, and they want less time reporting on student progress. So what I'd hope for Calgary is that people would be looking at this data and they'd say, ooh, we want to keep our teachers in our schools. Okay? And we want to, it doesn't matter if I'm a banker, if I'm a lawyer, it doesn't matter what it is. I want to be able to look at my child when my child says to me, I want to be a 4th grade teacher. I want to teach 8th grade. My dream is to be teaching high school chemistry. We can look them in the eye and we can say, great choice. Our culture is going to support you. Our funding stream is going to support you. You're going to be treated like a professional. Okay, that's where we want to be getting. But unfortunately, often what happens with this kind of data when it comes out, you guys do these great studies and the data comes out and nothing happens. Okay, the silence is deafening. So we got to figure out, how do we get beyond that? So now I'm just going to kind of go into a few more ideas here, and then I'll turn it over to respondents. So the first one is, we've got to be mindful as teachers. You've got to figure out ways to take care of yourself. And it's not always by working harder. It might actually by abandoning, maybe you abandon a few things. You look at what you're doing and you figure out, you know, some of this stuff is really required of me by curriculum standards, but some of these curriculum standards don't make that much sense, okay, for my population of kids. So I got to figure out ways to work with those standards so that they're really adjusted for this group of kids. And maybe it involves a shorter unit, a different kind of unit, a different form of assessment. And that's actually where your professionalism resides, is in your judgment, looking at all the research, looking at your life's experience, looking at the kids, and making those strategic judgments that'll help them to learn at high levels. So one of the things I think is, actually, I've worked with teachers all over the world, as you can kind of hear from the introduction, and you guys are mindful all the time. All the time you're making decisions about things that are good for kids. But nobody ever comes along and says, oh, that's mindful teaching. So the 2nd grade teacher, Liz McDonald, tonight, I was working with her. She was getting ready to leave the profession, and she was a brilliant teacher. So I worked with her in her class, and then I said, let's start a mindful teacher seminar. And after years of doing that work together, we said, let's write a book about it. That's great. You know, as a professor, you want to work with a person who's not just going to, you know, say you're the professor you know, but you want to work with a classroom teacher who's a bit feisty, and he says, okay, you're the professor, you know a whole lot of things, but maybe you don't know how to teach kids. You don't know how to handle the day in, day out interactions with kids. I don't mind saying it. By the way, my wife is a kindergarten teacher. She tells me that every day. She's, all right, Mr. Smarty Pants, you got your doctorate from Harvard. Now let's see you get in there and deal with this situation I got. It's good. It's good. Okay. Just because you have that doctorate, it doesn't mean that you know how to deal with the complexities of some of the dynamics going on in her classroom at all. So what I did is, with our seminars, we just documented teachers who we thought were being really thoughtful. So the first one up here is a special education teacher who is trying to work with kids and figures out that what these kids really need is to be calmed down. Okay, so she starts working with the kids with guided meditation strategies. You know, kind of put your hand on your heart, other one on your stomach. Calm, quiet. And kind of just let the kids practice that. And then after a while, the kids start asking for it. Okay? So activities that teachers can bring into the classroom. We had another teacher who had a runner, elementary school. Teachers, you know what runners are? Use the same term up here. You're looking around, and you're all of a sudden like, where's Jocelyn? Maybe the kids say, oh, she left. Where'd she go? Out the door. Huh. Look out, Jocelyn isn't out there. So then you call down to the front office, but nobody picks up. So then you go over to your neighbor teacher and say, could you just look in on my class while I go and try to find Jocelyn? And they say, I'm sorry, I'm in a really difficult moment right now. I can't leave my class. Right? So what the teacher was able to do in this situation, set up a safe haven for this girl. The girl's mother was in jail, the father wasn't part of her life. She just couldn't wait for the moment that her mom was going to come home. And she was always afraid she was going to miss that moment. Right? So kind of setting up a safe haven for the child. Then we had kids were arriving at school every day, and the older kids, elementary school, were always getting the younger kids in fights. They would taunt them until they'd get in fights. So these kindergartners and grade 1, grade 2 kids were showing up all traumatized. So Renee Simmons, God bless her, she says, I'm going to start riding the bus with the kids until they're all calmed down. Now please, if there's anybody who's a reporter in the room, don't say Dennis Shirley came up from Boston to tell Calgary teachers they should start riding the bus with the kids. It's more about teachers' judgment in all these different ways that fall below the radar screen of policy, right? Because they're responding to what the kids need. And then you can look at data, and you can do that in a mindful, reflective way. You know, like in higher education, we actually know that you should always look at multiple sources of data and see whether it triangulates. And then in the real world, the data doesn't always triangulate neatly. Kids could do well with literacy on this test, but not so well on this test, and then in the middle of this test, right? So what do you bring to your understanding of the data? Judgment, interpretation. You don't just respond reactively to the lowest bit of data. So how can we get past all this stuff? Now, one of the things I think is we've got to figure out ways to network educators together. So I was privileged to study a group in England called Raising Achievement, Transforming Learning that looked at schools that had low value added measurements, and they networked these schools together. And they asked the teachers in the different schools, so what do you need? Ooh, we need help with our English language learners. Oh, our foreign language program is disastrous. Social studies, we're just not moving. We can't get any achievement gains. So they networked all these schools together, and then they put together a menu for the schools of short, medium, and long-term strategies for their schools. Okay? So the teachers with their principal could go through and they could look at their short-term strategies, they could look at some medium strategies, so things they wanted to do in the next 3 years, and then long-term strategies the next 5 years. Now this network got rapid achievement gains, but at a cost. And the cost was that they forgot all about their medium and long-term strategies. Right, so you throw everything you got into getting those test score results up that next year. Right? And you can kind of do that for 1, you can do that for 2 years, but a lot of those short-term strategies aren't going to last over time. Right? So then you need to be more reflective.